Thanks for the introduction, and welcome to this talk on Leaky images, which is about targeted privacy attacks in the web. So this is joint work with my student, Chris, who cannot be here today for a very important personal matter, so you have to just take me. All credit for this work should go to him, so if you like it, it's all for him. If you happen to not like this work, you can just blame me because I'm here. All right, so this work is about a simple question, and this question is, has John visited my site, my website? John can be many different people, and your goal is to identify precisely that this person, John, has visited a website that is under your, and you are the attacker in my talk, control. So this question might be relevant in many scenarios. So for example, John might be some politician or celebrity, and you are hosting a questionable site, and you want to know whether this celebrity is actually visiting your site. It may also be that John is a suspected criminal and you're working for a law enforcement agency and you want to check whether John is actually visiting some illegal site. It may also be that you are working for some oppressive regime and John is a political dissident and you want to know whether John is accessing some content that is forbidden in your country. Or maybe you're just an author of a paper and you want to know which of all these PC members is actually accessing the additional material that is linked in your paper. So in all of these cases, you can use the attack that we are presenting in this presentation, which is called Leaky images. So it's a targeted de-anonymization attack, which basically allows you to find out whether one specific individual or one out of a small group of individuals is visiting a website under the control of an attacker. This is a rough outline of the talk. So I'm going to start with a basic variant of the attack, where I'm going to show how to attack a single person. Then I'll show how to extend this attack to a group of people, so you can find out who out of a small group of people is actually visiting your site. Then I'll show how to use it for linking pseudonyms. You can basically find out whether two user accounts belong to the same person. And finally, in case someone disables JavaScript and maybe also CSS, I'll show a scriptless variant of the attack that achieves the same things without requiring any scripts. And then finally, I'll talk a little bit about how feasible all of this is in practice by showing that many of the top websites, including Facebook, Google, Twitter, Dropbox, and many others, are affected by this attack because you can essentially abuse them to perform this attack. All right, so let's get started with the basic idea of the Leaky images attack. So the scenario is that we have an attacker who owns or operates a website, and then we have a victim, and that's John, and the attacker is interested in whether this victim is visiting the website. And then, of course, there are also many other users for which we do not really want to know whether they are visiting the website. We only care about this victim. So usually what happens when either the victim or some other user visits the website is that the attacker learns about the IP of the user and maybe also some kind of browser fingerprint. This is valuable information, but it's not enough to precisely identify that a specific person has visited the site, because different people may share the same IP, and a browser fingerprint has some entropy, but usually not enough to precisely identify who this person is. So what we're doing here, instead of just using the IP and browser fingerprints, is to use an image sharing service. Image sharing service sounds like a fancy term, but essentially what I mean by this is any website that allows you to share images with specific users. And if you think about it, there are many such websites, including Facebook, Twitter, Google, Dropbox, and many others, where you can somehow upload an image and then say, I'm sharing this image with this specific user, and user typically means a username or an email address. So what happens in the Leaky images attack is the attacker knows the username or email address of the victim and then shares an image through one of these image sharing services just with that victim. So only the victim is able to access that image. And then when the victim or some other user is visiting the website that is owned by the attacker, this website will also issue a request for this privately shared image. And now because this image has been shared only with the victim, there are two possible outcomes. One is, it's actually the victim who is visiting this website. And in this case, this image can be loaded, and the information that the image could be loaded can be sent back to the server of the attacker, and the attacker knows exactly that this person has visited the site. The other case is that some other user is visiting this website, in which case the image request will fail. And then the attacker learns that some other user has visited, so we know that this has not been the victim. To make all of this a little bit more concrete, let's look at an implementation of this in JavaScript. And as I said later on, I'll show an implementation that does not require any JavaScript. So what happens here is that we add a little bit of code to the website that is under the control of the attacker. And this code executes some JavaScript when the page has loaded. So specifically, what the first 2 lines are doing here is to try to load this privately shared image. So there typically is some URL that points to this image that we have shared with the victim. And then we just install 2 event handlers that check whether this image could actually be loaded. And then depending on whether it could be loaded or not, we are sending this information back to the attacker-controlled server. And then we know whether the victim was there or someone else. All right, so now all of this relies on image sharing in the web. So let's look a little bit more into what this really means. So when I say image sharing service, I mean any of these various sites that allow you to share images with specific users. You can do this, for example, on Google or Dropbox by sharing specific files with specific other users. You can do it on Twitter by sending a private message to one user and have an image embedded in this private message. Or you can, for example, also do it on Facebook by posting something and make this post visible only to a specific user. And then there are many other ways and many other sites where you can do the same. So these are just some representative examples. All of these image sharing services are implemented through basically 2 techniques. And sometimes it's only one of them, sometimes it's a combination of the 2. The first of them is authentication. So the image sharing website authenticates the user that is requesting an image, typically through cookies, and then only ships the image when the user has been authenticated. Or you can also implement image sharing through secret URLs. So there's some long URL that only the person you share an image with knows, and only who knows this secret URL can actually access the image. All right, so now you know kind of the basic idea of the attack, and you know the general setup of image sharing in the web. Let's now have a look at the 4 conditions that need to be fulfilled in order to enable this leaky images attack. So condition number 1 is that the attacker and the victim are users of the same image sharing service. So as I said, there are many sites that allow you to share images, and many of them are really popular and have hundreds of millions or even billions of users. So what an attacker can do is to basically create an account on some of these popular sites, and then the chance that the victim also has an account with at least one of them is pretty high. Condition number 2 is that the attacker can actually share an image with the victim. In many cases, for many of these image sharing sites, all you need to know is the email address and or the username of the person you want to share an image with. So it's pretty easy to do this. In some cases, there's some other precondition. For example, on Facebook, you need to be friends with that person. Condition number 3 is that the victim visits the site that is under the control of the attacker while being logged into the image sharing service. So that basically means you need to be logged into Facebook or Google or something else, which happens to be true for many users. I don't know how many of you log out of all of these sites all the time. I'm sure many average users don't do it, so this condition is also true in many cases. And the 4th condition is that the image sharing service uses cookie-based authentication in order to check whether someone is really allowed to access an image. So the reason why all of this works is the same thing that you've seen during lunch on your table. It's these nice cookies that some websites install in your browser, because these cookies are then sent to the image sharing service in order to check whether you or the person who is visiting the website is actually allowed to access the image. All right, so this was the basic idea of leaky images. Let's now look at a couple of extensions of this basic attack. So one of these extensions is to use it to not just attack a single user, but to attack a group of users. So one naive way in which you could do this is to basically share one image with each user. A scenario where this might be interesting is that you, for example, want to prepare a spear phishing attack on a small or mid-sized company, and you want to find out who reacts to a specific email by actually visiting some website. So now if you would take this naive approach, you would share one image with each user or each employee in this company. But the downside is that this requires O of n images and also O of n requests. And a slightly more clever approach uses the fact that you can share an image with a subset of users on many of these sites by basically performing a binary search across the set of all users. So this figure here illustrates this for a case of 7 users. And what we need here are 3 shared images. And we basically request image number 1, which has been shared only with half of the users. And then depending on whether this request succeeds, we know whether the user is in this half or in that half. And then we just do this again and again until we know exactly who has visited the site. Another extension of this Leaky images attack is to use it for linking pseudonyms. So here the idea is that there are 2 accounts that belong to 2 different image sharing services, and you want to know whether these 2 accounts belong to the same user. And what you can do here is to basically perform 2 Leaky images attacks in parallel. So you share with each of these accounts 1 image, and then request both of these images on your website. And if you see that both of these requests succeed, then you know that the person who has visited this website has actually both accounts, and you know that they belong to the same person. A scenario where this could be interesting in practice is, for example, for some law enforcement agency that knows that some account has been involved in criminal activities and that some other account belongs to a known suspect, and then you want to check whether these 2 accounts actually belong to the same person. All right, finally, I've promised a scriptless version of the attack. So this is a simple example how this attack can be performed without any JavaScript and without any CSS. And what we do here is to use this object tag in HTML, which essentially provides a logical if not. So what object does is to try to load some data that is stored at some URL. And if this data cannot be loaded, the next object tag is executed, which may perform some other request. So essentially what these highlighted lines here are doing is to try to request the privately shared image. And in case this request does not succeed, we tell our server, the attacker server, that this was not the victim. Now, just knowing that it was not the victim is not enough to know whether the victim has visited. What we also need to know is whether this whole page has actually loaded. And this is why we have a set of other image requests, which all point to invalid images, so to images that do not exist. And these requests will take some time, and then eventually in the most deeply nested request, we'll send a message to the server telling us that the whole page has been loaded. And then taking these 2 facts together, knowing that the whole page has been loaded, but it was not the victim, then we can infer when and whether the victim has actually visited the page. All right, so now this was all the theory. Let's now have a look at how well this actually works in practice. So we have looked at 30 of the most popular image sharing services that exist today in the web, and we have studied them. So we looked at Facebook, Twitter, Google, YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn, Pinterest, and many others. And what we did for each of these sites is to create multiple accounts. Then we've tried to find ways to share images from one account to the other. And for many of these sites, there's actually more than one way to do it. And then we checked if any of these ways to share images is suitable for the Leaky images attack. Here's what we found. So we found that out of these 30 sites that we studied, at least 8 are vulnerable to this Leaky images attack, which means at least 8 of those sites can be used to perform this attack. This table shows a subset of these 8. The full list is in the paper. So as you can see, for some of them, there's some prerequisite that needs to be fulfilled in order to perform the attack. So for example, on Facebook, you need to be a friend with the victim. But kind of surprisingly, on many of these sites, there's no prerequisite at all. So for Google Drive and Dropbox and Microsoft OneDrive, for example, you do not need to know anything except the email address or username of the person you want to track, and then you can just do it. So now, of course, all of this is not good. So what we did is to tell these image sharing services about this potential privacy problem. And fortunately, they reacted pretty quickly and effectively. So as of the time of writing the paper, at least 6 out of the 8 services have either already fixed or decided to fix the issue. And nicely, 3 of them also gave us a bug bounty, which we didn't expect, but is, of course, very nice. To give you an example of how this fix looks like in practice, let's have a look at Twitter. So before we notified them, every shared image on Twitter was a Leaky image. So every image that you shared with someone through some Twitter message could be abused for this attack. And the only prerequisite for sharing an image with someone was that the victim and the attacker are in a follower relationship, or that the victim has accepted direct messages from the attacker. After fixing the issue, Twitter has disabled cookie-based authentication for images, so they do not rely on cookies at all for deciding whom to send an image, and instead they use secret image URLs. And there's another fix. They also added some dialogue for users that basically asks the user before rendering an image that is sent from strangers. So it's two fixes for the same thing, and both of them are fine and individually would address the issue. More generally, there are a couple of mitigations that can be done in order to prevent leaky images attacks. And they basically can be done on 3 levels. The first is on the server side. One of them is what Twitter has done, which is to completely disable authenticated image requests and instead rely, for example, on secret URLs. Another idea is to use user-specific links for shared images. So basically, if I'm an attacker and I'm sharing an image with the victim, then I don't know the URL that the victim can use to access the image, because that URL is only known to the victim. And finally, on the server side, another option is to deploy some of the mitigations that have been proposed against CSRF, cross-site request forgery, and there's a discussion of how exactly to do this in the paper. On the client side, one possible mitigation is to do what the Tor browser is doing, which is to send cookies only to the domain that the user has entered in the address bar. And in this case, the solid attack wouldn't work anymore. And finally, another option that helps to mitigate this problem is to give more privacy control to users by letting users see and control which access rights they have to particular files and in particular to particular images. All right, so in conclusion, I've presented Leaky Images, which is a targeted de-anonymization attack in the web. I've presented the basic variant of this attack, which allows you to track whether a specific single user is visiting your website, and also an extension that works for groups of users. It can also be used to link pseudonyms to each other. And finally, all of this works in a scriptless way, if you want, without any JavaScript and without any CSS. We empirically found that this attack affects many sites used by hundreds of millions and sometimes billions of users. So I believe that website providers and browser vendors should be aware of it to protect the privacy of users. And that's all I have to say. Thanks for your attention, and I'll be happy to take questions.
Okay, so we have 2 microphones in the room. Please come up to the mic, state your name and affiliation, and then your question.
Stephen Checkaway, Oberlin College. Thanks for the talk. I like the attack. It's pretty neat. Have you thought about how you could detect this in the wild, and did you try to do that?
Oh, that's an interesting idea. We haven't really thought about it. I think what you would probably do is to check for third-party image requests on sites that you might suspect to do something like this, and then see if you, as a third party, can also access the image. And if not, then this is a shared image, and this is likely to be, I mean, this could be for this, it could potentially also be for other reasons, but one reason could be that someone is actually performing this attack. It's a great idea, but we haven't done it.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Colben Carlson from Facebook. Really good research and an awesome talk. Thank you very much for that. I am wondering if, do you know if this can be used for other types of media, like something instead of images? Could this be replicated with, I don't know, other pieces of data? Have you? Yeah,
good question. So it would also work for some other kinds of media, essentially everything that is accepted from the, oh my God, what's the name? Sorry? Yeah, same origin policy. Yeah, which I think also includes PDFs and some other files.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Zane from University of Illinois. My question, I don't know, you might have touched on this earlier because I walked in a little bit late, but does this attack reveal the identity of the attacker in the sense that when you share these images, does the victim get notified, hey, this person shared an image with you?
Yeah, great question. So in some cases it does, in many cases it does not. It depends on the image sharing service. There's some sites where you can share an image with just anyone whose email address you know. And in some cases, that person does not get notified. That's one of the reasons why I mentioned giving more privacy control to users as one possible mitigation, because in many of these sites, you don't even see who has shared an image with you. So you have no idea who might even be performing this attack.
Thank you.
All right, then let's thank Michael again.